So we'll start in a little bit. So everyone has a Dharma request sheet. We'll begin the Dharma request.
经转妙法轮，教导我们如何疗伤脱死离苦得乐，诸障无上。The Sangha with great virtue, out of compassion, for the sake of this assembly and all living beings, please turn the wonderful Dhamma wheel to teach us how to live suffering and attend bliss and end birth and death, and quickly realize numbers.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
Namo sadanto sujedoye ulahadi samya sambuddhoje.
Namo sadanto sujedoye arahadi samya sambuddhoje.
无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。The unsurpassed, deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma in 100,000 million eons is difficult to encounter. Now that I've come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing, I vow to fathom the thus come one's true and actual meaning. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Venerable Masters and Dharma Master, and good and wise friends in the Dharma.
I need to change the battery.
Judgment? Okay, just wait a moment. Okay. So our tech crew is getting things ready. So what we're going to do in the beginning of the sutra lecture is to open up the sutra text. Actually, turn, or don't open it yet. Take a look at the front of the front cover, and we have the title of the sutra as well as you could say the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that are associated with the sutra. You could say it's like the entourage, the assembly that comes for the sutra. And so what we start with, we'll recite the name of the sutra, and then start from there. So if people could put your palms together, we'll recite the name of the sutra to start. Namo Davang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Sai Namo Davang Guang Fo Hua Yan Jing Hua Yan Nai Wei Fo Bu Sai 达梵光佛，我眼睛，我眼乃为佛不在，南无大梵光佛，我眼睛，我眼乃为佛菩萨。So we're okay? Okay. So welcome, good evening, welcome to the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. We're here about to begin our Avatamsaka Sutra lecture. Tonight is, January 24th, 2015. We just got out of our Chan session and are beginning our new year, our new semester. Some people are going back to school. Some people are getting back to work, or maybe they never took a break. They're still working all the time. But the Sutra lecture has been going on without break throughout this entire time. And so tonight we're going back to looking into the Avatamsaka Sutra, also known as the Flower Garland Sutra of Great Expanded Teachings. And so I would like to invite you to open the sutra text to page 22 and 23. Put this in the back. I'll need it for the... Yeah. So I believe I see a couple new faces, just by way of introduction. Tonight, Jing Heshi and myself, Jing Chuan, will be giving the sutra lecture, and we'll be looking into this particular chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra called the 10 Grounds chapter. And the 10 Grounds, you could say, is a step-by-step, level-by-level explanation of what it takes to become a Buddha. The kind of, step-by-step process that the Bodhisattva goes through to realize Buddhahood. And so we've been lecturing this for, I think, a number of years now. And we're on the 6th ground, so we're a little bit more than halfway through. And for anybody who's familiar with Buddhism, the 10 grounds corresponds to the paramitas in Buddhism. If that word, if people are familiar with it, paramita often means to the other shore, perfection. So you take something all the way to the other end, you finish it, you complete it. And so the 10 perfections, or oftentimes it's called the 6 perfections as well. There's two lists. The 6th one is usually given as prajna paramita. We'll get to that tonight in tonight's text. Prajna paramita is the perfection of the wisdom of, you could say, emptiness. Being able to see things as it truly is. And Buddhism says that everything ultimately is empty. But it's not the emptiness that we usually think of. The emptiness that is, you could say, meaninglessness, or this kind of nothingness, or just everything is annihilated. It's not that kind of emptiness. The emptiness of Buddhism is actually, they say, actually very full. It contains, we also say, wonderful existence. It contains everything in it as well. And so this emptiness, often misunderstood, I think, in terms of translation, because it's hard to translate this concept, shunyata, kong, into English, because I don't think we quite have an idea that corresponds exactly to it. But tonight we'll investigate it, so that we'll go more deeply into this concept. So what we're doing is we're reading a very sacred text. This text has been given you could say, an instruction manual for cultivators of the way, people who want to look into their minds for thousands of years. And it's still here with us, and it's seen as one of the highest teachings of Buddhism, but also very, very down to earth, especially this passage today. It's talking about emptiness and how the Bodhisattva still has compassion for living beings. So I won't have too much of a preamble, we can just jump right into the sutra text. So what we do is we recite the Chinese first, and then we recite the English together. So what we'll do is I'll say a line of Chinese and then everybody will repeat it. And then when we get to the English, we'll repeat it or we'll chant it together. So we are right now on the bottom of page 22. The bottom of page 22. It starts with the characters 佛子 or F-O-Z-I. 佛子. So if you've never spoken Chinese before, this is very good practice. You can have different sounds in your mouth to see how that sounds like. Okay, so if we could put our palms together and recite the sutra. 佛子菩萨如是观. Sorry, that's one phrase. 观察有为多诸过患. 观察有为多诸过患. 无有自性. 不生不灭. 而恒起大悲. 不舍众生. 即得般若波罗蜜现前. 明无障碍智光明. Okay, let's recite the English together. The disciples of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva in that way contemplates the condition as having many faults and disasters, and as being without a nature of its own, and so not produced and not destroyed, yet he constantly gives rise to great compassion, and does not forsake sentient beings. Right then, Prajna Paramita manifests before him, which is called the unobstructed light of wisdom. If you could please turn the page. Top of page 24. Oh, Chinese, yeah. 成就如是之光明矣. 随修习菩提分因缘而不 sorry 随修习菩提分因缘而不住有为中随观有为法自性即灭亦不住即灭中，以菩提分法为圆满故。Okay. Once he has accomplished such light of wisdom, although he cultivates the causes and conditions of the Bodhi shares, he does not dwell in the condition. And although he contemplates conditioned dharmas as being in their own nature still and extinct, he also does not dwell in still extinction, because he has not yet perfected the Bodhi share dharmas. So, the tonight's sutra passage is actually a very meaningful passage because I think it's kind of all of a sudden the moment when this ground, the sixth ground, all of a sudden something else arises. We've been going into emptiness. We've been talking about, if people have come for the previous lecture, the 12 conditioned links, the Pratitya Samuppada, about the Buddha's analysis of the way things are. You know, upon his awakening, he realized dependent origination, saw it, and woke up. He saw how things worked. He saw how from my senses contacting something, I have a sensation, a feeling, how I go out and crave it, cling to it, take it in, and then that creates a whole reality of birth, old age, sickness, death, next life, etc., etc. He saw this whole process, which we went through many, many times. And so we've been going through it almost in a kind of analytical way. As we've been saying, it's kind of like a scientific text. People have read physics, you have the, every force, if you apply a force, has an equal, my physics is so long ago, equal and opposite, opposite. There's a reactive force to it, right? and it's very, you could say, kind of cold. It's kind of like, okay, it doesn't inspire your heart. Doesn't make your heart go, wow, that's really wonderful. It's just like, okay, that's how it works. Okay, it seems a little bit mechanical, and even it seems a little bit, okay, that's how it is. But tonight we get to the place of great compassion, and for me, to be real honest, this is the door I came in. I came through the door of great compassion. Emptiness was a door that for me was, I think only in the last maybe year did I find it something that I could even approach. Like, okay, maybe this might make sense to me a little bit. It's not a door that I immediately was inspired by. Great compassion was something that moved my heart. And tonight we see the great compassion of the Bodhisattva arise in this whole process. And we often hear that line how, for the sake of living beings, the Bodhisattva doesn't go into emptiness and teaches living beings. And so we hear, it's like a common saying, I think, oftentimes we hear it when people say it. But just when we were talking about the sutra last night with Jing Heshi, we said, wow, the sutra's actually saying it here. We actually get to see the sutra say it in actually the line right there in front of us. It's not just hearsay. It's not just somebody's thinking about something. So tonight, I think, is a very important section whereby we see that emptiness, as we were just talking about at the very beginning, isn't this kind of nothingness, isn't this kind of nihilism, isn't this kind of, okay, everything's empty, so I don't care about anything. Nothing matters. But instead, it's a kind of chance to really see things clearly, but from there, really go and help living beings with a kind of a heart of great compassion. Yeah, please.
Okay, there you go. So for those of you who have just joined us and have not been here the previous weeks, you've been hearing Jin Chuan Shu speak about emptiness. So just to provide some context, because we explained what emptiness was, I think, was it 2 weeks ago? I think it was 2 weeks, maybe.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So, like Jin Chuan Shu is saying, emptiness does not mean nothingness or voidness or like empty space. Rather, emptiness means it's empty of all the discriminations of the mind that we use, the thinking mind, or what in Buddhism would be called the sixth consciousness. That means the mind that you're using right now to listen to us, the mind that you're using to see, the mind that you're using to figure things out as you're listening to what we're saying. That's the sixth consciousness. So in the first line it says, disciples of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva in that way contemplates the condition as having many faults and disasters and as being without a nature of its own, and so not produced and not destroyed. So essentially what it means is this sentence is a continuity of the previous paragraphs that says that the Bodhisattva has seen through reality and has entered the ground of emptiness. So what's reality? Condition. All things are conditioned, all dharmas, everything we see. And it's not just external, it extends to within our conscious, our mental processes that we use. That's considered to be conditioned as well. And then the emptiness part comes in again. He says, yet he constantly gives rise to great compassion and does not forsake sentient beings. The only way this sentence can make sense is if you have an idea of what emptiness feels like for the Bodhisattva. And 2 weeks ago, we explained emptiness as wonderful existence, meaning a feeling of joy, happiness that extends beyond what our conscious minds can even begin to understand. So it's empty of the conscious mind. But we would probably, given that everything we see and hear is within the conscious mind, have a hard time figuring out how it feels like because we absolutely have no context. We have no experience, we have no context unless any one of you here have been meditating. And sometimes you reach a certain stage where you can, the stages where the sixth consciousness stops functioning and you experience that emptiness. And whether that moment lasts or not depends on your foundation in your lifestyle of precepts, the way you treat yourself and others. So the Bodhisattva, having entered the ground of emptiness, is extremely blissful. The Bodhisattva has no fear, there's no worry, there's no discrimination, no duality. It is a very complete state of existence. You feel absolutely fine. There's no tendency to move in the mind. You don't need to bring forth patience because everything is just absolutely okay. And this is what marks the Bodhisattva from being different from, say, someone with the intention of an arhat who just wants to end his own suffering. It says here, the Bodhisattva constantly gives rise to great compassion and does not forsake sentient beings. That means the Bodhisattva does not choose to dwell in emptiness. As in, does not choose to abide in emptiness. Because in emptiness, he realizes that the self does not exist, and at the same time, living beings do not exist. But he does not forsake sentient beings, because he brings forth great compassion. He could, as Jin Chuan Shi will show later through the Buddha story, abide in emptiness because it's just so easy. It's almost like, for myself anyway, waking up on a very cold winter morning, especially in a room that's not heated, but you're so warm and comfortable under the covers. And we have to wake up for a morning ceremony at 4 o'clock. So you can probably imagine when you wake up at 3 something in the morning, it's cold, it sometimes can be a bit harsh, and all you want to do is just, I don't want to wake up. I just want to stay in this comfortable state. And that's the Bodhisattva's experience. And it takes a lot to bring yourself out from there and say, my vows of great compassion to go and save all living beings. So that's why this is really, really significant. For us, we probably think, the Bodhisattva at the Bodhisattva stage is just easy, right? For him to do that. But once you begin to even understand what emptiness means and the bliss that comes with emptiness, you realize what a great, I won't necessarily call it a sacrifice, but how great a hero someone like that is. To put his or her own, have other people's importance come first, rather than his or his own feelings. Yeah.
Let me just add to that. So I think what's actually really critical, what Jinghan Shi was just mentioning there, about the Bodhisattva's conduct. He's here basically not attaching to that emptiness. You could say when Jinghan says is like a kind of like a sacrifice. I think maybe what you would just say is the Bodhisattva actually sees things even more deeply for the way things are, so he doesn't get sidetracked. Something comes up and it's really easy and you can naturally go that way, but rather than getting sidetracked, he stays the course. He stays the course, doesn't attach, and from there, the next thing happens, which is prajna paramita. He has really the perfection of wisdom, because he doesn't even attach to emptiness. Because there's a tendency, what Jinghan Shi was just describing, to attach to emptiness. But the other element, we were just describing the Bodhisattva's practices, is to actually take the sutra text and see how much of our own lives, our own existence connect to this. And so I think from there, if we look at, we were just describing the Bodhisattva's practices, but if we really look at our own lives, where we're at ourselves, how do we embody, how do we relate to this passage? Do you want to explain condition? Okay.
So when I was reading this passage, the first thing that my eyes noticed was the word condition. It says the Bodhisattva in that way contemplates the condition. So what does the condition mean? Because since that's what the Bodhisattva contemplates. Condition means every single thing that we take to be real. As a school in Buddhism that calls it the 18 realms. So the 18 realms can be broken up into 3 sets of 6. The ears, the eyes, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then there's the ears, the eyes, what is it? The eyes see sights or forms, and when they connect, they form the eye consciousness, which is what we are using right now. All of you are using the eye consciousness to look at these 2 monks here and all the altar behind us. So similarly for the rest of the 6, rest of the 5. Ears, you hear a sound, when it connects, it becomes the ear consciousness. So you get these 6 senses, including the mind, the 5 senses plus the mind, plus everything connected in terms of form, it becomes 18. And that in essence is how we experience the world. That's our reality. Every single thing that we see. And then how every single thing that we see, hear, smell, taste, and feel, feeling through the body, translates into the mind moving. The mind has thoughts. When I see something, when I see the clock, automatically my mind interprets, okay, it's 8:03 right now. When I hear a sound, I know the heater just kicked in as I was speaking because I hear. So the mind moves with these 5 senses, but the mind also has a mind of its own. As people who meditate will know, you can sit for a while. Sometimes when you sit, you feel the body going away, and then sounds stop moving your mind, and your mind comes down. You don't smell anything. You're in control of your senses, and then the mind races. If I tell you, say, a pink balloon, pink elephant, your mind automatically forms that image. Pink elephant, nothing like a pink elephant exists in the world, but your mind can conjure it up. So all mental processes, including everything external, makes up our reality, and the Buddha says that that's condition. What does condition mean? It means it arises depending on conditions. For example, this wooden fish, we call this a wooden fish, and it makes a sound. So the sound that you hear is depending on certain conditions. The condition of this being made from this particular kind of wood, me hitting it, and you within hearing range, all those are conditions. Same goes for processes of the mind. And what the mind does is really, really interesting because the mind tells us who we are. The mind constantly interprets all the sense data that we get in. You're listening not to me, you're listening to your mind, figuring out what it is I'm saying. If I'm using certain words and terms that you have not heard before, your mind will go, If it's familiar, you say, I know what you're saying. Right? So, which brings us to then how
Okay. The how, they have many faults and disasters. No problem. So I think this is a really good reflection because basically I think we can all see it in our own lives. This is something where the sutra is just pointing something out that I think if we spend some time reflecting on things, we would see. And probably what's the hardest one to see is the thing that we attach to the most. But we know what we attach to the most. I think if we all just kind of sat down and thought, okay, what's the thing I go to whenever I feel a little bit uneasy or depressed or anxious? What sense do I use to satisfy, to to make that go away, right? There's a kind of a movement of the mind to try to satisfy, to find happiness, to find, you could say, an escape through the conditioned realm. But I think if anybody has any experience with that, somehow it just doesn't satisfy. This has been, I think people, I've mentioned a couple of times I'm in the university program, and so reading various Western philosophers. In fact, Western philosophers come to the same conclusion that, you know what, you can go out for all these things and it doesn't satisfy. And we just constantly have this lacking. Human beings constantly have this feeling of not having enough, and we go out and try to gratify that our desire, and then we get what we want, and then we get bored, and then we go get something else, and then we get bored, and it's just this constant seeking, searching, wanting, and it never satisfied. And so I would say that's a really big problem with the conditioned realm. If we look at our lives, look at what happens moment to moment, or action after action, we see that the conditioned realm really isn't very stable, isn't very reliable, isn't something that we want to put our faith in. Because from our experience, over and over and over again, it seems to give us promises, but it doesn't satisfy. And so what I think in Buddhism is really interesting, there's a tendency in the West, though, that it gets into nihilism. So the emptiness that happens is actually this kind of, a little bit nihilistic. But Buddhism actually doesn't do that. This is why I really like this, because the Buddha basically teaches that this emptiness is actually a very deep joy and happiness that is then able to go out and rescue living beings, to help living beings at a very profound level. And so it's not a nihilism. It's actually and it's not eternalism. It's not that we just go on with what we think is ourself here, on and on forever. It's this conditioned, what we were just describing, this conditioned process, this habitual process that continues on and on. And if we can see through it and let it go, we abide in this emptiness, which is our fundamental awakened nature, which is ultimately empty. So I don't know how to describe it, because you can't describe it. Yeah.
Actually, just want to clarify. So earlier mentioned that, for example, seeing. So we have the eye. We have the object to see. Also the see, the see consciousness. Those three elements. So those three elements come together. So that would be seeing experiences. So that's called condition. So
Are you making a statement or are you asking a question? Okay, so what Ellen is saying is that initially, so what we discussed just now was that we have the eye, the faculty of the eye, which is the physical eye, and then there's a form that the eye sees, which is, say, the flowers in front of it. And when the two get combined, you have the eye consciousness, and then you are aware that you're seeing flowers. Is that right? And they say if you take one of the conditions away, like if I close my eyes, I won't see the flower anymore. So the mind stops seeing the flower. Is that right? Okay. Does that answer? You could say it's also conditioned by light. If there's light, I can see. If there's no light, I can see. The light does not reflect back, for example. Conditions means that it's always dependent on something else. It arises because it's dependent on something else. That's another way of looking at condition. And another characteristic of condition, which is why it has many faults and disasters, is that all conditioned things are not permanent. Or I prefer the word inconstant, meaning they always change over time. So how does that lead to faults and disasters? Well, say this cup. This cup was not always a cup. It was probably some kind of clay in the ground that was dug up. And depending on how careful I hold this cup, it may not be a cup, right? Or how the next time someone washes it or carries it on a tray, you get bumped by someone else, although you're very careful. So if you couple that with how we see objects, right? So we understand that, okay, everything's impermanent, everything changes. Yeah, I know that cup one day may not be a cup. That's not really the problem, but how we see the cup is or could be a problem or could not be a problem. So if I'm looking at this cup and I'm saying, this is just a cup, I've seen Chinatown sell this cup for like 20 cents, right? And so what happens if this cup breaks? It's all right. We have so many other cups. Or we can just quickly replace it. It's not such a big deal. But what happens if I tell myself, oh, this cup was made by the first patriarch of China. He carried with him the earth from India, from the ground of the monastery, or the exact place where the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree. He dug up the earth, he took it to China, and he made this cup with his own hands. And it's been handed down from master to master. And finally, it's now my cup. Wow. Then what happens if the cup breaks? So these stories we tell ourselves every single day, every single time. Our friends, our relationships, our possessions, our belongings, our job, our ego. Who am I? How do I see myself? Because all these are conditioned, that's why they bring faults and disasters. A lot of people push away aging. I know a lot of people dye their hair to maintain a youthful experience. The beauty industry is huge, multi-billion-dollar industry. People go to extreme lengths. For them, it's normal. For someone like me, it's a bit weird. They go under surgery to maintain or to change their appearance according to their own standards of beauty. For a lot of people, that's really normal. So everyone, our whole there's a lot. How would I say? Our whole existence, the normal existence, is built upon denying the realities of life, which is things are conditioned, are first impermanent, inconstant. But yet, and later, as Chin Chuan Shu was explaining, not satisfactory. It doesn't hit the spot. Even if it does, the satisfaction that you get is short-lived, right? But living beings, because we live in the mind, our conscious mind, the sixth consciousness, we don't know any better. So what do? We place all our happiness, all our hopes for happiness in things that are conditioned. We place our happiness in our children, our relationships, our family, which we know one day will cease to exist, just like my own body. If I get really attached to myself, I'm sick right now. No, that wasn't. What happens if I find out that I'm not going to live forever? That, it's coming.
You're gonna find out.
What? I'll find out.
What happens if you find out you're gonna live forever?
Bad use of language. What happens if I have a date suddenly? I find out that I only have 6 months, 3 months. How will that change? Imagine if you have a car that is prone to break down. You know, the brakes sometimes work, sometimes don't work. The gearbox might just drop out of the chassis. The engine might overheat. And you want to go on a trip across the country in that car. Will you ever find peace of mind? Or will you constantly be worried? Right? But that's how we live our lives. We have we put all our faith and trust into things that are not, into things that are conditioned, things that are impermanent or inconstant, that we know if we look deep inside ourselves, that will never bring us satisfaction, but we only have those to rely on to bring us that satisfaction and happiness that we all want.
So one example of this, what the Bodhisattva is going through right now, can be found actually in the Buddha's own life. I didn't know if he was on this particular ground, but it's a very good illustration of the principle of the sutra text. And this comes from the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon, if people are familiar, is the text that the Theravada tradition rely on, that they use as their main texts, and it has a lot of like stories and explanations of the Dharma from the Buddha's life. And it's also within the in our tradition, it's called the Agamas. But this particular text is translated from the Pali text by Ajahn Thanissaro. And this is one sutta called the Noble Search. The Noble Search. And when I read it, I was very struck by it because it was so down to earth and so human. And the Buddha's own, you could say, reflection on his own life, using it as a way to teach his disciples. And so I thought this would be a really good text to share with everyone, to give people a sense of how the Buddha, in another context, with the monks in India, taught this, I think, this principle through giving his own life story. And if people are familiar with Buddhist texts, oftentimes there's a little bit of repetition, there's a little bit of kind of steadiness to the text. And so the reason for that is so that people can use the text to reflect. And so I believe what the Buddha was doing when he was addressing his audience was to say, let me share you my life story, because I want you to reflect on your own life and see, what are you looking for? What are you searching after? And what can you look for? And so here, the Buddha is addressing an assembled group of his monastic disciples. So I won't read every single word, and I'll paraphrase a little bit and maybe modernize a little bit. But people are very interested in it. You can definitely find it online. It's called the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the Noble Search. It's Majjhima Nikaya 26. So you can find it yourself if you want. But basically the Buddha begins and says, monks, there are two kinds of searches. You can say maybe there's two kinds of quests. Or maybe you can say there's two kinds of adventures in life. Two ways to go about your life. And he says there's two kinds, and what are those? There's the ignoble, which means not noble, and the noble quest, the noble search. And he says, what is the ignoble search? What is the search that is not that great, you could say? He says, there is a case where a person, being subject himself to birth, so who's subject to birth? I think all of us, right? Seeks happiness in what is likewise subject to birth. So basically, someone, which is all of us, parentheses, is born, looks for things in the world that are born, that come into being. He says, a person who is subject to aging looks to age, something for aging for a solution. Someone who is subject to illness, subject to death, subject to sorrow, subject to defilement. We sometimes use the word outflows, the kind of leaking of our energy, kind of losing our energy into all these defilements. We usually call them like jealousy, anger, hatred. They're all afflictions of the mind.
Any thoughts based on greed, anger, and ignorance. Ignorance being another word for not seeing things as they are.
Yeah. So basically, all those things we are engulfed in, immersed in, subject to, and then we go and look for something. Yeah, we look for happiness, particularly in those things. And if you look at all the great novels, the not all the great novels, not all the great stories, because the Buddha story is a little bit different at least. But those stories, usually you're going out to look for something. You look for, this is Odysseus. You look for, what's this? I just lost the name. I had it in my mind. I just lost the word.
What? This is Pictionary? Or?
No, not dictionary. It's all those movies where he goes off and goes for looking for the Holy Grail and all these things.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones, that's right. Okay, Indiana Jones. I had it in my mind before. I was like, you imagine Indiana Jones. He's always kind of looking for something. You go to the Lord of the Rings. He's got this ring. We're always got something, and we're going for something, or we're getting rid of something in that case, right? And there's this kind of search, and it's after things of the world. It's after the conditioned realm. And there's great stories from it. It's heroic. These people do heroic things. They put out a lot of effort to get these things. But in Buddhism, the Buddha goes, well, does that really bring happiness? At the end of all those movies, is Indiana Jones really happy? I don't know. I don't know if he was really happy. He got this Holy Grail and didn't keep it for very long in the movie, or all those movies that we watch. In the end, is the hero really happy? I remember one of the philosophers was saying how if you look at all the fairy tales of the West, they have these fairy tales and they're always about seeking after stuff. They're always about, it's like Cinderella, and dreaming of the prince, the whole story. And at the end of the story, everything finishes, it says, then they live happily ever after. But there's never any story about the happily ever after. Because then the philosopher, that's because it's inconceivable how that could actually happen. It's always about seeking after something. That's the story. The happily ever after is just the last afterthought. He's going to write it in, because that's not reality. Nothing is happily ever after, right? For sure, you get Prince Charming, and can you imagine it's a happily ever after? I don't know if it's happily ever after at that point. But the poverty, the affliction she had to go through, the hard work she had to go through, all the story, the anguish, the fighting, other things, finally getting what you want. That's the ignoble search, right? So that's the ignoble search we go through.
So another way of seeing it, when the Buddha says that where a person himself subject to birth seeks for happiness in things that are also subject to birth, is kind of like, when Jin Chuan Shu was explaining it, in my mind, I came up with the idea of, if I have a headache and I go see a doctor and the doctor says, oh, you have a headache? I have a headache too and I can't do anything about it. I'm like, yeah, okay, bye-bye, I'm not going to, that's it. So that's kind of like how the Buddha is describing
it. So fortunately, we'll read the story. He's a doctor that does not have the headache. Okay, so he says, what may be subject to birth? So the Buddha actually gives a list to the monks. He says, spouses and children are subject to birth. That's actually pretty close, saying our family is subject to birth. So where I would say many cultures, if not all cultures, we put a lot of weight and importance on our family. And that's actually a good thing. I think in many ways, being able to really care about family members, create a harmonious family, those are really good virtues and values. But what the Buddha's not saying not to do that. So it's really important. And one of the misreadings of Buddhism often is that, I'm completely unattached, so, I don't care about what you're doing. You just do your thing, I do my thing, and I won't pay attention to you at all. It's not a cultivating of this kind of unfeeling heart. The unattached quality is that you're able to be amidst your feelings. The feelings come up still, but you're completely unattached. It's not clinging to feeling. It's not clinging to thoughts. That's important. The Buddha doesn't say the thoughts and the feelings are the problem. He says so we just read the previous section quite a lot. It's the clinging where we go wrong. It's the clinging, the ignorance, the craving, the identifying. That's where the problems lie. But the experience of it, we can do a lot with. We can have a heart of great compassion. and rescue living beings, right? But here it's saying we're looking for a solution. We're using our spouses and our children and saying, I'm living my life for my kids, and they're going to give finally ultimate meaning to my life. Sorry, sometimes kids don't do exactly what their parents want, right? That happens. Oh, that's true. That's me. Actually, the Buddha says that himself. When he became a monk, he says later I'll say this, while still young, a black-haired young man, still black hair, endowed with the blessings of youth in the first stage of life. Because in India, what they do is basically they have different stages in life. So first you start as a young man, you're supposed to study, you're in the family, and then you grow up, you become an adult, you raise a family, and then finally in the last stage of life, when you're old, you go off into the forest and you cultivate. You become a renunciant, right? That's the process of the Indian life cycle. For us, it's, we get born, we go to school, we find a job, have a family, then you go get retired.
You take care of grandchildren.
You take your grandchildren. This is a cycle. So he said, you know what? Before I get old, I'm going to actually renounce the world and cultivate the way. So he said, okay, it's the first stage of life. And while my parents, unwilling, were crying with tears streaming down their faces. He went with their tears streaming down. I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the ochre robe, and went forth from the home life into the homeless life. And so the Buddha, as they said, Jinghua said, is children aren't very reliable. They can actually go become monastics, although their parents don't want that to happen. Or the parents sometimes, at the same time, the Buddhas, the parents really want their kids to be monastics, but the kids, not a chance. So kids, spouses, equally so, I think, can be unreliable. And so if we give that kind of pressure to our spouses and children, I think, to be honest, our spouses and children actually feel somewhat miserable, because there's nothing like a child who has to live under the oppression of living out their parents' life for them, right? Or a spouse who has to live out the projections and expectations of their spouse for them. If we can give a lot of space to our loved ones to grow and nurture their awakened nature, and that's really wonderful. So he said, spouses and children are subject to birth. What else is subject to birth? Men and women slaves. I guess in that time they had slaves, or you could say servants. So people that you can say maybe employees, people who we interact with, our colleagues. We don't use slaves for this one. It's people we interact with in general. They're not reliable. Ultimately, it's not something that we can put. We seek after the perfect relationship. Doesn't happen. Goats and sheep. So I don't think we have any goats and sheep in the monastery now. And it says fowls and pigs, elephants, cattle, horses, and mares.
So during the Buddha's time, these were all markers of wealth.
Yeah.
So if we were to interpret it with a modern lens, it would be things like phones,
iPhone 5,
cars,
6.
Homes, what else? Clothes,
Cars.
yeah, pants, things that have things that we see that have possessed value.
Yeah. So what do we in modern times think is the symbols of wealth, the symbols of power?
Prada handbag, right?
What? iPhone. Yeah, an iPhone. Like kind of what iPhone you have, and then now they change it all the time with something so that you're always out of date.
Jimmy Choo shoes, right? Yeah, all the ladies are here.
I have no idea what that means. So. But okay, so then he says gold and silver are subject to birth. I don't think we see gold and silver too much these days, but we definitely see money, right? Credit cards. Those are things that, in fact, I would think that's probably in modern times where most people put our faith in nowadays. We don't put that much faith in other things. We put our faith in money. I don't know, people can reflect, but it seems to be something very deep. Like, because family, we kind of travel all around. They're all over the place. We don't go to parents, but people take money as, I have my money, I can support myself, I'm safe, I'm okay. That's kind of like the place people go to. I think. So yeah, just as a reflection. So the Buddha says all of those things are subject to birth. So he says, subject to birth are these things, and one who is tied to them, infatuated with them, who has totally fallen for them. That's kind of like falling in love. You fall for them. Whoa, got tricked by them. Being subject to birth seeks what is subject to birth. and said, what may be said of that, subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement. So he goes through the whole list again for those things, but corresponding to aging, corresponding to illness, corresponding to death, corresponding to sorrow, corresponding to the afflictions. So he says, this is the ignoble search.
So in other words, conditioned things
Yeah.
are subject to birth, that means come into being, formation, not literally like being given birth, unless you're a human or animal, but like a cup, subject to being
Created. Yeah.
Created, yeah. Aging, that means it goes through a process of decline. What was once a spotless cup now has water stains, scratches, and marks and scuffs. And then it's also subject to sickness and disease. Everyone understands that. Sickness and disease. Death, or the form changes, you could say. Sorrow, if you are attached to it, it affects you, depending on how attached you are to something. And then finally, defilement, which is interpreted as the three, any thoughts that are based on greed, anger, thoughts and actions based on greed, anger, and ignorance.
So the Buddha gives another type of search. So this is what's the great part about Buddhism, is because it gives another option. Sometimes we only get the first option, and then our whole life is just running around in those different options. I go in for money, then go, oh, the money's not working for me. Let me go for a relationship. This relationship doesn't quite work either. Maybe I should go back to money. No, that didn't work before. So let me go after, the latest technology, or maybe I go after knowledge. Maybe I have to go after, goes on and on and on. So the Buddha goes, okay, I will give you the noble search, and he says, so this is a person himself subject to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth. What here says, seeing the faults and disasters of the conditioned dharmas, seeks the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke. Yoke meaning like the burden, right? If you see cattle, they get yoked to some plow, and they have to do all this work. You get yoked. So we're yoked. He says, gets rest from the yoke and realizes the unbinding. So basically, he says, from reflecting on those causes and conditions, all the faults and disasters that come from the conditioned dharmas, then one gives rise to this aspiration. Let me find something else. What else can there be? So that's why for some of the parents and things, because we live in the monastery, it's a complete flip, because I grew up without any interaction with monastic life. So my parents definitely had no expectation for me becoming a monastic. But for being in the monastery, sometimes parents have expectations. They want my parents to be a monastic. And it doesn't work, I have to say, because it has to come from inside. The Buddha's here. The Buddhism is not a process where you force somebody, you force feed Dharma, here, do this. This is good for Dharma is good for you. It comes from one's own experiences and reflections. And so if the child has never actually reflected on the conditioned realm and sees it as subject to birth, aging, sickness, death, and defilement, and has problems with it, to force them in the monastic form is really miserable. It's like going to hell. It's like, gosh, I can't do anything. This is miserable. But if you see the problems with it, then you go, wow, this is wonderful. This is the path I want to pursue, because this is the place I can find a solution, right? And so the Buddha is saying, if you contemplate these things, then the Dharma really makes sense. The Dharma, we feel sometimes, stops losing that kind of meaning in a little bit, because over time it kind of just grows. If you reflect back onto the impermanence, the suffering of the world, it all of a sudden the Dharma comes back to life, because you realize what it is about, the source of what it's about. It triggers your mind to realize what the solution with the Dharma is for. You have to recognize the problem. So that's why when we're sick, we really start looking at the medicine cabinet. We start using different medicine. When we're just kind of feeling okay, we don't really pay much attention to medicine. We don't take the medicine. Although the Buddha says we're always sick, because we're always subject to old age, sickness, and death is always bearing down on us all the time. But we just don't feel it sometimes.
We disguise how we see things that are impermanent or inconstant, or the fact that they do not bring us lasting satisfaction, because we're always moving. The moment you feel uncomfortable, you move. I just shifted because I had a slight cramp. So the moment I feel uncomfortable, somewhere from deep inside me tells me I need to move. I'll shift. So we spend our lives constantly shifting, moving, until we're encountered, like Jin Chuan Shi says, say, if you fall sick, and either you literally can't move or you cannot escape from your condition, disease, for example, and then it's real suffering. Because then, no matter what you do, you turn to your right, you turn to your left, you take medicine, it's not going to help. At times like those, things fall into perspective. And if you don't have the perspective of the Buddha or the Dharma behind you, things start looking really bleak or grim or scary, for example. So the Buddha, from looking at all things, says everything is conditioned, impermanent, subject to bring me stress or no satisfaction. He turns around and says, let me look for happiness, not in any of those things instead.
Okay. So now the Buddha talks about himself some more, and he says, I too, monks, before my awakening, when I was an unawakened bodhisattva, being subject myself to birth, sought what was likewise subject to birth. So I also like that about the Buddha in his suttas. He's not this kind of perfect. He doesn't present himself as like I've been perfect forever, So I'm the Buddha. He always brings it really to people, saying, I had the same problem. I did this too. And when I was going through my process, I in the past went through this cultivation and looked for the solutions in the wrong places. But then he says, what if I, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, were to seek the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, the unbinding? So then he shows them through his own experiences this process of how he came to that conclusion. So he's not forcing them to say, you should do this. He's just saying, consider this. This was what my experiences were. What is your experiences? Right? So he said, so at that time, while I was still young, a black-haired young man, endowed with the blessings of youth in the first stage of life, while my parents were unwilling, crying with tears streaming down their faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the yoga robe, and went forth from the home life into the homeless life. So then what did the Buddha do? Right? I think we know some of the story. People know that he went off and sat under the Bodhi tree and became enlightened. But before that, he did a lot of other things first. So he actually first went to a spiritual teacher named Alara Kalama. So he says, having thus gone forth in search of what might be skillful, seeking the unexcelled state of sublime peace, I went to Alara Kalama, and on arrival said to him, friend Kalama, I want to practice in the doctrine and discipline. When this was said, he replied to me, you may stay here, my friend. This doctrine is such that a wise person can soon enter and dwell in his own teacher's knowledge, having realized it for himself through direct knowledge. So this is interesting. If you imagine in India at the time, there's a lot of spiritual teachers, and you can leave, you could say the let's say material realm, the kind of the normal life, the more mundane world of the workaday world, and go off on a spiritual quest. And there's these people all over the place cultivating different things. And so the Buddha naturally goes, I need to find a teacher. So who do I go to? Okay, I find one teacher, Alara Kalama. And he says, what I know, you can know too. And you just practice my process. You do what I say. You practice my teachings. You follow my discipline. The Buddha has the same. He says he has his teachings and his discipline. You follow it, and you'll realize what I know. And so here the Buddha actually quickly learns the doctrine. And as far as just reciting it, repeating it, I could actually speak the words of knowledge, the words of the elders, and I could affirm what that I knew and I saw along with the others. So the Buddha actually quickly sees the teachings for himself. And so he said, I thought it isn't through mere conviction, just pure belief, that Alara Kalama declares, I have entered and dwell in this Dharma, having realized itself through direct knowledge. Certainly, he dwells knowing and seeing the Dharma. So I went to him and said, to what extent do you declare that you have entered and dwell in this Dharma? Well, when this was said, he declared the dimension of nothingness. So we call it sometimes the sphere, the realm of nothingness, of emptiness, is one of the very, very high, we sometimes call it the heavenly realms, the realms that are in the formless heavens, where there's absolutely not even the body, right? It's just consciousness. So he's cultivated, this cultivator has cultivated to a place that he's able to empty everything out, this nothingness. And so the Buddha basically realizes the same thing, right? So this teacher says, I realized this. And so, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to
Okay, please.
Quick?
Yeah.
Quick. Okay, I'll be quick. So what Chin Chuan Shu was saying just now, from my understanding of the text, so first the Buddha understood the principle or the theory. And then when the Buddha understood the principle and the theory, then he reflected upon his teacher and says, if the teacher can do this, so can I. So the Buddha believed in himself. He did not think that this was something beyond. He had a lot of faith and confidence in himself. So he tried out the technique, the principles and the theory that he had learned, that he could explain as well as a teacher. And then the result, he also then attained the same level as his teacher. And what Chin Chuan Shu explained just now was he went to his teacher to compare notes. And the teacher said, you've got it. And what did he get? He got the sphere of nothingness. And in terms of the dhyanas, you often hear of people speaking of the 4 dhyanas, which is actually there are a total of 8 dhyanas. There are 4 dhyanas in the form realm, and then there are 4 dhyanas above that in the formless realm. So it's called nothingness because there's no more physical kind of existence in those realms. And in the realm of nothingness is number 7 highest. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this teacher was actually really accomplished in his meditational skill. He achieved level number 7. And in that sphere, there's still consciousness, but very, very subtle. There's no way we can conceive of with our minds, but it's very, very subtle.
And I think just one more thing to point out, which I think is really central in Buddhism, is that the Buddha says, through direct experience. Through direct experience. He's not saying, through faith, I followed this path and I've now found a solution. He actually says, through direct experience. He had faith in his teacher, and his teacher's method, applied it, and then realized it, and said, okay. And he went to the teacher and says, is this what you realized? He said, as Jing Master said, compare notes. And the teacher says, yes, this is it. You realized it too. So he says, this friend is the extent to which I have entered and dwell in this Dharma, having realized it for myself through direct knowledge. And the teacher's response is, it is a gain for us, my friend, a great gain for us, that we have such a companion in the holy life. So the teacher's a very good personality. He's not jealous or upset. He's saying, great, wonderful. Another person has realized this Dharma, right? So the Dharma I declare I've entered and dwell in, having realized it for myself through direct knowledge, is the Dharma you declared you have entered and dwell in, having realized it for yourself with direct knowledge. And that the Dharma you declare you have entered and dwell in, having realized it for yourself through direct knowledge, is the Dharma I declare I have entered and dwell in, having realized it for myself through direct knowledge. The Dharma I know is the Dharma you know. The Dharma you know is the Dharma I know. As I am, so are you. So are you, you are, so am I. Come, friend, let us now lead this community together. So one element of these suttas that you kind of get this repetitiveness is because these suttas were actually memorized by the monks and repeated as an oral tradition. So you can imagine, if you can imagine chanting this, over and over again, If you have like repetitive phrases that go back and forth, it's kind of got a natural beat to it, right? So that's why it's got that flavor. So then he says, in this way did Alara Kalama, my teacher, place me, his pupil, his student, on the same level with himself and pay me great honor. So at that point, does the Buddha go, great, I've arrived, I'm a teacher, I'm done. Great. He doesn't. He says, but the thought occurred to me, this Dharma does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to stilling, to direct knowledge, to awakening, nor to the unbinding. Okay. But only,
Meaning he will still die.
yeah, but only to the rear appearance of in the dimension of nothingness. So dissatisfied with the Dharma, I left. So the Buddha realized this state, which is being said as being extremely blissful, and said, it's not it. This is not the solution to life. This is not what I'm looking for. This is not the conclusion of the noble search. There has to be something more. So although I'm offered a teaching position, great respect, thank you very much, but I'm not going to take it. I'm going to go look out somewhere else. So then he went off and went to another teacher, and this teacher's name was Udaka Ramaputta. So I won't repeat the whole sequence of the text because it's almost identical. But basically, this teacher realizes the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. Sometimes translated as the realm of neither thought nor non-thought. And this is when Jigong was saying is the highest one, is the highest formless heaven that you could enter in meditative practice and be reborn in.
I have a description.
Okay, yeah.
So I'll read a description about what it's like to be in this state. It says, the beings in this plane only have mind and no physical body. They are unable to hear the Dharma. Check that out. They are unable to hear the Dharma. In this sphere, the formless beings do not engage in perception. But the Buddha, after experiencing this state, realized that it will eventually lead to further rebirth. So even such a high state of samadhi or dhyana was not permanent. And if you knew something like that would change, how can you be satisfied? It's not going to last.
Okay, so I'm going to make the quick story a little bit quicker because we have to get to the great compassion of the Buddha and his enlightenment. So he says, in search of what is skillful, seeking the unexcelled state of sublime peace, I wandered by stages in the Magadhan country and came to the military town Uruvela. There I saw some delightful countryside with an inspiring forest grove, a clear flowing river with fine delightful banks. So what a nice place, right?
Everyone check out that photo behind you.
Yeah, there you go. A nice river, a nice tree, a peaceful place, right? And it says, and a village for alms going on all sides. So there's places to go. He's going alms around to get food. So the thought occurred to me, how delightful is this countryside, with the inspiring forest grove, clear flowing river, with fine delightful banks and villages for alms going on all sides. This is the right place for exertion of a clansman, or you could say a cultivator, intent on exertion, intent on practice with vigor. Right? So I sat down right there thinking, this is where I will practice. So then monks, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, seeking the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding, I reached the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding. So that's the moment he woke up. So in this text, his sutta, the Buddha doesn't go in great depth about the process of ascetic practices, etc. He just gets to the point of his search. His search is here. He realized it. He says he realized the unbinding. And being myself subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeing the drawbacks in it, I transcended that. So he realized the what was beyond aging, beyond illness, beyond death, beyond sorrow. He put down the yoke. He realized the unbinding. And so he said now, at the very end, he says, a vision arose in me. Unprovoked is my release. This is the last birth. There is now no more further becoming. So if people remember the 12 conditioned links, right? The 12 conditioned links. There's a process of, at one place there's birth, old age, sickness, death, and that whole process. Also, becoming is one of those links. So basically, the Buddha has put an end to those 12 links. So he's gone through it, right? So he's realized the emptiness. So if you want a correspondence, this is when the Buddha actually has realized. Actually, the next paragraph says that. So I'll read that. Then the thought occurred to me, this Dharma that I have attained is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture. You can't just philosophize about it. Subtle, not easy to see, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation, meaning our generation probably, delights in attachment. So we take joy in attachment. Ooh, I really like that. I mean, right? Is excited by attachment. We get excited by attachment. Enjoys attachment. We get immersed and think, this is really wonderful. For a generation delighting in attachment, excited by attachment, enjoying attachment. This and that conditionality and dependent co-arising or dependent origination, which is exactly what we were just discussing all these weeks, is hard to see. So yeah, so basically because we are so involved with our attachments and get so caught up by it, we can't see this dependent arising. So the Buddha then says, this state too is hard to see. The resolution of all fabrications, projections, the relinquishment of all these acquisitions, possessions, the ending of craving, dispassion, cessation, the unbinding. And if I were to teach this Dharma and the others would not understand me, that would be very tiresome for me, very troublesome. And so the Buddha at this point goes, these living beings are hard to teach. Maybe I won't teach. Maybe I won't explain it. Or you say emptiness is so much nicer. Gosh, these living beings would be a lot of trouble. I'm just going to dwell in this emptiness. And so you see, you realize, if you can see through the dependent co-arising, you realize something that's very profound and very deep. That is, as the Buddha here describes it, is a place where you're completely free from all clinging and craving. It's a place that is without defilement, is peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture, right? It's deep, profound. So then, at this point, I think if people know the story, the Buddha then doesn't just enter nirvana and go, okay, that's it. Life's over. I've finished. I've done the job. I've finished. In fact, Brahma Sahamapati, one of the gods, comes down in the story, and he says, having known with his own awareness, this Brahma, the line of thinking in my awareness, he thought, the world is lost. The world is destroyed. The mind of the Tathagata, which is the Buddha, the Arhat, the rightly self-awakened one, inclines to dwelling at ease, right? He's going to just bliss out, happy. Not to teaching the Dharma, right? Right here, the Bodhisattva here says he has great compassion and does not forsake living beings. Here it says, the Buddha is going to forsake living beings. He's just going to dwell in the happiness of the realization of emptiness, right? So then it says, then just as a strong man might extend his flexed arm or flex his extended arm, Brahma Samapati disappeared from the Brahma world in his own heaven and reappeared in front of me. So he appears, right? It's like a good movie. You have a movie, you can have the Brahma disappears. Arranging his upper robe over one shoulder, he knelt down with his right knee on the ground, just like we did in the Dharma request, that people are watching the request, and saluted me with his hands before his heart and said to me, Lord, let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. Let the one well gone teach the Dharma. There are beings with just a little dust in their eyes who are falling away because they do not hear the Dharma. There will be those who will understand this Dharma. So that's not exactly not what was said tonight in the Dharma request, but that was Brahma Samapati's Dharma request, saying there will be some beings who will understand. They have just a little dust in their eyes, little dust in their eyes. So the Brahma Samapati says a few things more, but one passage and verse he said, which I thought was really had a kind of oomph to it. He said, "Rise up, hero, victor in battle. O teacher, wander without debt in this world. Teach the Dharma, O Blessed One. There will be those who will understand." And then the Buddha reflects on that. He says, then having understood the Brahma's invitation, Out of compassion for living beings, I surveyed the world with the eye of an awakened one. And as I did so, I saw beings with just a little dust in their eyes, and those with much, those with keen faculties and those who were dull faculties, those with good attributes and those with bad attributes, those who are easy to teach and those who are hard to teach. Some of them seeing disgrace and danger in the other world. Just as in a pond of blue or red or white lotuses, some lotuses born and growing in the water might flourish while immersed in the water, without rising up from the water. Some might stand at an even level with the water, while some might rise up from the water and stand without being smeared by the water. So too, surveying the world with the eye of an awakened one, I saw beings with just a little dust in their eyes, and those with much, those with keen faculties and those with dull, those with good attributes and those with bad, those easy to teach and those hard, some of them seeing disgrace and danger in the other world. And having seen this, I answered Brahma Samapati in verse, open are the doors to the deathless, to nirvana, to the unconditioned, to those with ears. Let them show their conviction, their faith, their belief, their trust. Perceiving trouble, O Brahma, I did not tell people this refined, sublime Dharma. But now he's given his consent to teach. He says, now I will teach. I will open the doors, right, to the unconditioned. Then the Brahma Samapati, thinking, the Blessed One has given his consent to teach the Dharma, bowed down to me and circling me to the right, like we just did, disappeared right there. So then the Brahma left. So this is a movie. You can see the movie sequence. Right now the Buddha is about to teach, and now our Sutra lecture time is almost over. But I wanted to point out a couple things. So then, what did the Buddha do? He thought who to teach, and so who did the Buddha teach? Do people remember? Any 5 companions? But he first thought of 2 other people. His previous teachers. He thought of his previous teacher. He thought of Alara Kalama. He says, Alara Kalama, he just has a little dust in his eyes. Right? So he was pretty close. He was a sphere of nothingness. But Alan just said, yeah, he passed away. So he said, Buddha looked, said, oh, Alara Kalama passed away a week ago. Ooh, he says, and he says in the sutras, a great loss that Alara Kalama suffered. If he had heard this Dharma, he would have quickly understood it. So you meant, what a loss. He could have awakened, but he missed the opportunity. So you can imagine how precious we have the opportunity to learn the Dharma. This great teacher of the Buddha, in fact, himself couldn't have heard the Dharma. So he said, who's the other person he thought of? The second teacher, right? Uddara Ramaputta. And so he thought, Uddara Ramaputta, he can understand my Dharma. He just has a little dust in his eyes. He is competent. He is wise. He is intelligent. And so he goes and looks. Uddara Brahmaputta died last night. Oh well. Okay, so he says the same thing. Great loss for Ramaputta, because if he had heard this, he would have understood, right? So, well, who else? So then he thought to himself, and he thought, well, those 5 monks who attended to me when I was resolute in my practice, when the Buddha was practicing the ascetic practices, very, very vigorously, he had 5 disciples who were taking care of him, and they actually left him because he basically took maybe some porridge, some simple food, and they thought he's become real lazy. He's really indulging his sensual pleasures, so he can't be really a cultivator of the way. So they left him, and so they didn't respect him anymore. And so the Buddha looked at them and said, they are ready for the Dharma. So then he went off to go teach them. But actually, if people want, you can look at the suttas online. It's very easy to find. If you type in the noble search, the Buddha, the sutra will pop up. But the Buddha goes off to teach these 5 disciples. He meets another person on the road. This person is kind of like a manifestation of somebody who doesn't quite understand the Dharma. So he talks to the Buddha, and he goes, doesn't quite believe the Buddha, and just kind of walks on. And so before the Buddha actually talks to the 5 disciples, he actually gets his first Dharma talk to somebody who has no faith. He just kind of goes, okay, you're enlightened? Okay. Just goes on,
Right? Well, actually, this person's name was Upaka. And he eventually became a disciple of the Buddha, and he did end birth and death. But upon his first encounter, he was very impressed by the Buddha's countenance. The Buddha was very calm and very peaceful looking. So he asked the Buddha, he said, "Who are you?" And then the Buddha described himself. He said, "Oh, I am the deathless, I have..." It would sound very pompous, but the Buddha was just very matter-of-factly telling Upaka who he was. And the text described Upaka as very sarcastically smiling and say, what was the exact words?
I didn't put that one out, but
Okay,
but
so
basically, I remember
he
though.
said, "That's what you say."
Yeah, that's what he
He
said.
shook his head and
Shook
he
his
walked
head
away.
and walked away by a side road.
Yeah. So a commentary says that the Buddha's speech wasn't meant, it wasn't a teaching, it was just a statement. And I think the emphasis, the meaning that we can get from that is that there was nothing for Upaka to gain from there. So there was not something that he could see within himself and apply to himself for his own realization. Which is why that kind of statement, telling people, for example, "I am a monk. Oh, I've been a monk for many years," does not mean anything to people. You have to teach the conditions of people something that they can apply inside, and that's what the Dharma is. So to summarize the passage that we have read today, the Bodhisattva sees things for what they are. Things are conditioned. Things are impermanent or inconstant. And from there he goes towards emptiness. But because of great compassion for living beings, he does not abide in emptiness. That means he does not stay there and forsake living beings. And because of his great compassion for living beings, as illustrated, at the Bodhisattva stage, at the sixth ground, the result is that he gets prajna paramita, which is great wisdom, to accompany, to reflect the amount of compassion that he has. Does anyone have any questions about the passages or the other sutra? Jin Chuan Shu?
What does it represent?
So the girl that brought Gautama the
Buddha.
meal of rice porridge, milk and rice porridge. Well, I think one of the things that I understand from there, and Jin Chuan Shu will have his own version, is that it represents the middle way. Because before that, the Buddha thought that the way to end birth and death was in, how would I say, a practice of denial, an ascetic practice that was built on a foundation of denial, thinking that that would lead to salvation. But in fact, it's a middle way of not going to extremes. That is the teaching that I get from that one.
I think that's actually a really important idea, because this is one thing when Buddhism coming into the West is often misunderstood, that Buddhism is teaching this kind of nihilism or this pessimism about just deny the senses. You don't have any of those. So it's not about that. It's about this kind of really inner attunement and finding the middle. And each person's middle way is going to be different. So as monastics, we have our middle way, given the discipline that we're given and the training we have. People who live in the world, it's often the encouragement to say the whole the 5 precepts. Not to kill, not to steal, not to create sexual misconduct, not to engage in sexual misconduct, not to lie, not to take intoxicants, and practice, being a good person, being a good family, a householder. Those are all very good virtues, and that's the middle way for that. So each person finds the middle way for where they're at, and it's a kind of that attunement. So yeah, I think other element, you said all the Buddhas did that, is that what I also see the Buddha's stories in his life is actually a teaching. That's why the Buddha gave this whole story as a Dharma talk, right? That's what I like about this particular talk, is because the Buddha is using his own life as a Dharma talk for reflection, for learning. And so all the Buddhas, in a way, manifest, and in a way are manifesting their lives in a way to teach us living beings how to practice, how to walk the path. And they don't just teach it by words, they don't philosophize it. They teach it through embodiment, which is much more meaningful, I think, right? If the Buddha just comes and says, do this, do this, do this, and okay, you got the way, no, that's fine. He doesn't do that. He actually lives the life, right? And I can imagine how much more meaningful that is. We have, our founder, Master Hua, and how much work and effort that he had to go through to establish the Dharma, and how moving it was. People saw him work really hard, how much difficulty he went through in his entire life to establish the Dharma here in the West and bring it to many living beings, and moves our hearts, right? It's something that we see. He doesn't just talk about it; they embody it, they show it, and that's what moves us. Go, I'm going to be like that. That's real virtue. It's not a just saying something. It's a manifesting. There's no pressure. There's no pressure to say do this, right? It's not do exactly this. It's I did this. Do you want to do this? Do you want to follow that? Do you want to find a happiness that goes beyond just the conditioned realm? Try this. Yeah.
So just coming back to the milk porridge question. The reason during the Buddha's time, there were a lot of ascetics that tried to get into deeper levels of concentration through practices that exist until today. For example, not cutting of fingernails, lying on a bed of nails, standing on one leg, some only eating grass, for example, and they subject themselves to physical acts in the hope that will bring them to very deep levels of concentration. But as in the Buddha's experience, he attained the highest level and still found that to be impermanent, inconstant. That's not, and it's still within the sixth consciousness. You're not breaking through yet. So that's why the Buddha, to me, the rice porridge is very important, as in the middle way. Those practices may lead to some kind of attainment, but it is not ultimate. And it still brings you back to birth, old age, decay, and the whole cycle all over again.
Well, you said thoughts, feelings, and attachments are not an issue. Why don't monks marry? But they are issues. etc. Thoughts, feelings, and attachments actually are issues. Particularly the last one. The last one is a big issue, which is if you go to the 12 conditioned leaks, the place of craving and attachment is actually the place where we go wrong. And so the monastic form is, actually to not get married is, for the monastic, is a great blessing. Where I think it's like, wow, we're just so fortunate.
Yeah. So basically, thoughts.
To do that.
Basically, to answer that question, thoughts, feelings, and whatever was mentioned in the question are an issue. Yeah.
An issue. Actually, just one element of it. The Buddha describes in the same sutta about going off and walking the path, is that it's like you're in like a wild deer, and if you're attached by all those things of the desires, all the senses, you're like a deer that's caught by a hunter, And he says that's just like you're caught by Mara, the kind of the lord of delusion and confusion. And so when you cultivate the way and you leave samsara, it's just like you're the deer and you're free from the traps. And he says the wild deer is living in the wilderness. Carefree it walks, carefree it stands, carefree it sits, carefree it lies down. Why is that? Because he has gone beyond the hunter's range, the place where the hunter can find them. So that's the spirit. So when it's beyond thoughts, feelings, all those things that you're just talking about. It's beyond that. So that's the whole. You could say the Buddha, out of his compassion, created a way that somebody who wants to follow his path, to follow the path through this way. So I would say it's just it's not, you could say, how do I describe it? It's not like one's quote unquote better than the other. You know, it's not saying, oh, you should get married, you should get married. It's everybody, I think, has different affinities for their life, what they want to walk on. And the Buddha said, if you really want to take the Dharma and cultivate it, you know, as a full-time thing, I will create an environment for you to do that. And also for lay people, there's definitely a relationship of mutual support, and we have different roles in bringing the Dharma to people, to helping living beings. You know, so that's the relationship. Yeah. Okay, so if people can flip to or find the sheet that you have in your book. On the back, there should be a transference of merit. And this is our practice of, you could say, trying to bring forth our great compassion and helping living beings. So we got to sit in our lecture tonight. Hopefully it wasn't too miserable and you were happy. And so you get to share that joy and happiness with others. And so whatever you would like to send the goodness to, be it family members, friends, all living beings, and for whatever good purpose that you wish them to have, maybe no longer be sick, you know, find peace of heart, peace of mind, or realize the deathless, you know, anything is fine. So, okay. Share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Okay, you all stand and bow to the Buddhas. Bow in respect to the Venerable Master.